What would you do if the people you loved the most betrayed you, took everything from you, and expected you to sit back and do nothing? That was the question running through my mind as I stood there, staring at the wreckage of my family's holiday gathering. Christmas, an occasion meant for love, warmth, and unity, had turned into a nightmare. It started with a casual comment. My brother's family declared with cold certainty, no wife, no kids, no life. And somehow they thought that gave them the right to take what was mine. I had worked hard, built my life on my own terms, and all of it had been twisted into something they could use for their own benefit. They had never understood me. They never tried, but I never imagined that their disdain would go this far. When they took my savings, my inheritance, they didn't just take money. They took my trust, my belief in family, and in that moment, they shattered the bond I thought we all shared. As I walked into my mother's house that Christmas morning, everything felt wrong. The tree was surrounded by open presents, and my brother's son, Christian, was already deep into playing his new games. No one had waited for me, even though my mom had specifically asked me to arrive at 10 a.m. The moment I stepped in, the room went silent. A cold, awkward stillness hung in the air. My mom greeted me warmly, but there was something in her smile, something strained. My sister-in-law, Gabriella, didn't even look up from her phone as she muttered, "Oh, you made it," like I was an afterthought. I tried to brush it off, put on a smile, and set my gifts down by the tree. But the tension in the air was undeniable. As I glanced at Christian, his bright smile was the only thing that seemed real. For a moment, I forgot the discomfort and allowed myself to enjoy his excitement over his new gaming setup. But then my brother, Andrew, interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Don't bother Uncle Dominic. He probably doesn't understand these things anyway, too busy with his whatever it is he does." That was when I felt it. The first sting, the judgment, the assumption that my life, my choices, were meaningless. What they didn't understand was that I was living my truth. I was working remotely for a tech company, traveling the world on my own terms. It wasn't the traditional life they expected, but it was mine. And yet, as Dad had always supported me, I realized that since his passing, things had begun to shift, sharply. The comments, the glances, the subtle digs, they'd grown more frequent, more personal. But I never expected the Christmas dinner to turn into a stage for their accusations. That's when it all came crashing down, and I realized that everything I had worked for, the life I had created for myself, wasn't just under attack. It was being stolen, piece by piece. When I walked into my mom's house that Christmas morning, the atmosphere was nothing like what I had imagined. It was our first Christmas without Dad, and even though everyone tried to keep up appearances, I could feel the emptiness in the house, the absence of the one person we had always leaned on. The room was filled with opened presents, leftover breakfast dishes, and the faint scent of the roast. But what made me feel most out of place were the eyes of my family. Mom hugged me tightly, but there was a forced smile on her face, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Gabriella, my brother Andrew's wife, barely looked up from her phone, offering me only a half-hearted, "Oh, you made it," as though I were some distant guest who had crashed their intimate gathering. I could tell that our relationship hadn't been the same for a while, but this time it was clear that something was off, intentionally cold. I smiled awkwardly and placed my gifts under the tree, trying to ignore the tension. Christian, my brother's son, was the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see me. He jumped up, eager to show me his new gaming setup. Moments like that made me forget the discomfort, but they didn't last long. Andrew quickly cut in with his usual sarcasm. "Don't bother Uncle Dominic. He probably doesn't understand these things anyway, too busy with whatever it is he does." That was when it hit me. The judgment, the disdain. They had never understood me, and I had never fit their mold. I had built my life on my own terms, working remotely for a tech company and traveling around the world. It wasn't the traditional path, but it was my path. And for as long as Dad had been around, I had the support and understanding I needed. But since his passing, those subtle comments had turned into something more pointed, more frequent. Everything changed when we sat down for lunch. Mom had made Dad's traditional Christmas roast, the first time since he passed, and the table was unusually quiet. Then Gabriella, breaking the silence, asked, "So Dominic, any special someone in your life yet? You know, at your age, you really should be thinking about settling down. Christian needs cousins his age." Before I could even respond, Andrew jumped in. "Oh, he's too busy living the bachelor life. No wife, no kids, no real life, right?" He laughed, but there was an edge to it, one that I'd gotten used to over the years. And when everyone else at the table nodded or turned their eyes away, I knew this wasn't the first time they'd discussed my life choices. I held my tongue, focused on my food, trying to remain calm. But Gabriella pressed on. "What exactly do you do with your time?" "Work all day behind a screen, travel to empty hotel rooms. That's not living. You're just existing." Her words cut deeper than I expected. "You're wasting your potential. Dad would have wanted you to live more than this." That was when my voice broke through, sharper than I intended. "Don't tell me what Dad would have wanted." The tension at the table was palpable. Mom tried to change the subject, asking about New Year's plans. But Andrew wasn't done. "No, we need to talk about this. The will reading is next week, and we need to be realistic here." He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if he were sharing some deep insight. "You've got all this money saved up, no responsibilities, while we're trying to give Christian the best life possible. It's not fair." That's when I saw it. Mom's expression. Guilt. She couldn't even look me in the eye. "What do you mean, realistic?" I asked, starting to put the pieces together. Gabriella sweetly chimed in. "We've had some expenses. Christian's private school, the house renovations Dad promised to help with. You know, we had to borrow against what we knew was coming from the will." My stomach dropped. "Borrow against what?" "You borrowed from my inheritance?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Andrew quickly corrected me. "No, we didn't borrow. We just needed it. You've got so much saved up already, and we have a family to think about." Everyone nodded in agreement, even Mom, though she looked pained as she did. The only person who looked uncomfortable was Christian, who had stopped eating and was staring at his plate. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping across the floor, and the room fell silent again. Everyone probably expected me to explode, but instead I smiled. "Thanks for lunch, Mom. I need to go." "Oh, don't be dramatic," Gabriella started, but I was already walking out. Behind me, I could hear Andrew's voice, mocking me for always running away from confrontation. By the time I got home, my phone was flooded with messages. Most were from Mom, saying we needed to talk things through as a family. One was from Andrew, telling me to man up and face reality. I hadn't responded to any of them yet. Instead, I called Dad's lawyer and left a message. Tomorrow I'd find out exactly what they'd done with my inheritance and what they meant by borrowing it. The worst part? I kept thinking about Dad's last conversation with me just a week before he passed. He'd made me promise to take care of the family, but also to stand my ground. At the time I thought he was just rambling from the medication. Now I wonder if he knew something was coming. Something like this. The next few days felt like they were dragging, and yet I couldn't escape the whirlwind that had started at Christmas. The messages kept coming in, each one more insistent than the last. Mom kept texting, asking me to come over and talk. Andrew left a few angry voicemails, telling me to stop being selfish, that Christian's future was at stake. I didn't know what to do with any of it. My mind was spinning, trying to process the shocking reality that my family, the people I trusted the most, were the ones who had taken everything I worked for. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep the betrayal went. The loan documents, the forgery of my signature. It all made sense now. My inheritance wasn't just something they wanted. It was something they felt entitled to. And I was just a distant figure to them, someone they could manipulate and take from, without a second thought. They hadn't even asked. They just took. And the fact that they thought it was perfectly fine made my blood boil. It wasn't just about the money. It was about respect, about love, about family. They had stripped all of that away, reducing me to an ATM in their eyes. They didn't care about my life choices or my happiness. They cared about one thing, what they could get from me. And suddenly, I was reminded of the lesson Dad had always tried to teach me. Family isn't always who you think it is. It's not just about blood. It's about loyalty and trust. And right now, I had neither from the people I had called family. I called Mr. Wilson, Dad's lawyer, the next morning. I felt a sense of urgency in my gut, like something was about to break. I met him at his office, where he handed me a thick folder full of documents. My heart sank as he started showing me what they had done. Loan documents, multiple ones, some with my name, my forged signature, all over the past year, each one pulled from my portion of the inheritance. My mind raced. Over $285,000 gone. They knew what they were doing, Mr. Wilson said, his voice calm, as if this kind of thing happened every day. Your brother and sister-in-law have been living beyond their means for years, and they've been using your father's declining health as leverage to get what they wanted. You're not just dealing with a financial mess, you're dealing with a pattern of manipulation. I felt sick. My stomach twisted as I looked at the forged documents. The signatures were sloppy, not even a good attempt to cover up their tracks. They had no shame. Mr. Wilson continued, Your father was aware of all this. He amended his will 2 weeks before his death after a particularly concerning conversation with your brother. He knew what was going on, and he didn't want you to be left in the dark. That's when he showed me the bank statements. I was stunned. Andrew and Gabriella weren't just struggling, they were drowning in debt. The private school they bragged about. They hadn't paid tuition in months. The house renovations they were so proud of, funded mostly by credit cards. The Mountain View property Dad had left behind was in jeopardy, and the rest of the estate was being bled dry by their reckless spending. My mind raced as I tried to process everything. My inheritance, the money that was supposed to be mine and Christian's future, had been drained by their selfishness. But it didn't stop there. Mr. Wilson pulled out another document, a last-minute amendment to Dad's will. It was dated just 2 weeks before he passed, and this is where everything changed. The will stated that any unauthorized loans taken from the inheritance had to be repaid before anyone could access the full estate. And the kicker? Dad had left me in charge of overseeing the repayment plan. It was clear now. Dad had known they would try something like this. He trusted me to handle it, to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. But what caught me off guard wasn't just the financial mess or the deception. It was how my brother and Gabriella had been plotting behind my back for so long. Mr. Wilson then revealed something even more shocking. Andrew had tried to get me declared financially irresponsible. He had been working with a financial advisor to have me stripped of my portion of the inheritance. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a calculated attempt to gain control over everything that was rightfully mine. I left Mr. Wilson's office feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't let them get away with it. But I also knew that the consequences of exposing them would be far-reaching. The family would be torn apart. But I couldn't ignore what had happened. I had to make them face the truth. And for the first time, I realized that the hardest part wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. It was standing up for my dignity, for everything my dad had worked for, and for the future I had promised myself and Christian. As I drove home, my phone started buzzing again. Texts from Mom, voicemails from Andrew, and even a message from Christian apologizing for what had happened at Christmas. It was from him that I got the one message that struck me the hardest. "Uncle Dom, I'm sorry about Christmas. Dad and Mom were wrong to say those things." It was a small thing, but it meant everything. Christian, at only 12 years old, was already seeing through the lies. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for the future. Maybe the truth would win out in the end. The following days were a blur of phone calls, messages, and mounting tension. I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling of betrayal that continued to eat away at me. Yet I knew I had to act quickly. My family, what was left of it, was spiraling out of control, and as much as I wished I could just walk away from it all, I knew I had a responsibility to do something. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much this situation had shattered my sense of self. I had always prided myself on my independence, my ability to carve out my own path. I had never asked anyone for help, not even my father, when I made decisions that went against the grain of the family's expectations. But now, I had been betrayed by those I least expected it from. My brother, who I had always believed I could count on, had done everything he could to take what was mine, while my mother, who I had trusted to be my moral compass, had stood by, enabling the whole thing. The weight of it all was starting to take a toll. I found myself questioning everything, my choices, my relationships, my life. Did they truly see me as worthless, as just a waste of space? Was my entire life nothing more than an afterthought to them? But even amidst the turmoil, there was something stronger inside me, something I couldn't ignore. Dad had trusted me to stand my ground. He had believed in my ability to do what was right, and that thought sparked something within me. It was no longer just about the money or my inheritance. This was about my father's legacy, about preserving the values that he had instilled in me, values that had always guided me, even when my family had rejected them. I couldn't let Andrew and Gabriella erase everything Dad had worked for, everything I had worked for. I called Mr. Wilson again to discuss the next steps. The amended will, the documents, and the evidence were all in my hands now, but I still had one last thing to do before I could make my move. "We need to move forward with the repayment plan," I told him, my voice steady but filled with resolve. "But I want to make sure they know exactly what they're up against." Mr. Wilson agreed, and we set the plan in motion. I knew the moment I revealed the truth to Andrew and Gabriella, everything would change. The calm I had been pretending to maintain was crumbling beneath me, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my family's future and Christian's, who had unwittingly become a pawn in their game. The day of the meeting arrived, and my stomach churned as I pulled up to my mom's house. I had no idea what I would face inside, but I was ready. I had made up my mind. The truth had to come out. There was no other choice. I walked into the house, and immediately I saw the faces of my family members, already gathered in the living room. The tension in the room was palpable. Andrew, Gabriella, and Mom were seated on the couch, their faces drawn and defensive. There was no Christian in sight, which only added to the unease. My Aunt Linda and Uncle Pete were also present, their expressions unreadable. Even their financial advisor, the one they'd been consulting behind my back, sat with them, waiting for me to make my move. Andrew was the first to speak, his tone as sharp as ever. "You've made your point, Dominic. But this isn't the way to handle things. We're family. We should be working together." I almost laughed. Working together? They had been taking from me, trying to dismantle my life, and now they wanted to act like everything was just a misunderstanding. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I didn't say anything at first. I just set the folder down on the table in front of them. I could feel their eyes on me as I opened it and pulled out the documents. Their expressions shifted, but they said nothing. I slowly went through the pages one by one, showing them the forged signatures, The loans they had taken from my inheritance and the hidden truth about their financial troubles. As I spoke, I could feel the walls they had built around themselves begin to crumble. Andrew's face twisted with anger. "You think you have it all figured out, don't you? You think you can just walk in here and take control, that you can ruin everything Dad worked for? You don't know what it's like, living with the pressure of keeping everything together, of raising a family." I stood tall, my voice unwavering. "No, Andrew. You're the one who doesn't understand. You never did. This isn't about keeping things together. This is about doing what's right. You've been stealing from Dad's legacy, from his family, and now it's time for you to face the consequences of that." The room fell silent. Mom looked like she wanted to say something, but she remained still, her eyes downcast. Gabriella sat frozen, her face pale, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The reality of what they had done was finally sinking in, and for the first time, they didn't have an answer. But I wasn't done. I pulled out the amended will, the one Dad had changed just weeks before his death, and placed it in front of them. "Dad knew what was happening," I said quietly. "He knew everything, and he left me in charge to make sure you didn't destroy this family. He left me to protect what he had built." As I spoke those words, I could feel the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. I had always tried to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, but that wasn't going to work anymore. For the first time in my life, I was standing up for what I believed in, for what was right. And I could see it in their eyes. They knew they had lost. But I also knew this wasn't over. The hardest part was still ahead. The repayment plan would take time, and there were more battles to fight. But I had taken the first step, and I wasn't going to back down now. As I sat in that quiet living room, staring at my family, I could feel the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, but I knew this wasn't just about the money or the betrayal. It was about something far deeper. My father's legacy, my own place in this family, and the choices that had led me here were all tangled together in this mess of emotions. It struck me in that moment that family, as we often think of it, isn't just about blood. It isn't just about shared history or the memories we make together. Family is about trust. It's about loyalty. It's about knowing that the people who are supposed to love you will be there, not to take from you, but to stand with you when things get tough. And yet, in that room, all I saw were faces that had no understanding of what it meant to protect each other, to truly care. I thought back to my father's last words to me, the ones he had insisted I remember: "Stand your ground." At the time, I thought it was just one of those rambling moments, the words of a man who was nearing the end of his life. But now those words resonated deeply within me. My father had known that things would change after he was gone. He had known that people would take advantage of the situation, and he had made sure to leave me in a position where I could protect what mattered: his legacy, our family's integrity, and ultimately, my own sense of self-worth. I glanced over at Christian, who had quietly entered the room, still standing in the doorway. He had been listening. I could see it in his eyes, the understanding, the wisdom far beyond his years. He wasn't like the others. He had seen through their lies, and I knew that he understood the real cost of betrayal. It wasn't just about the financial fallout. It was about the emotional scars that would remain, the fractured relationships that would never heal. He was the only one who had spoken to me with true sincerity since this whole mess began. "Uncle Dom," he said, his voice shaky but strong, "I don't want you to go through this alone. Dad and Mom, they're wrong, but you can't let them break you." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I saw hope. In the midst of all the pain and anger, Christian had become the reminder of everything I had wanted this family to be. His words reminded me that the love I had for them wasn't gone. Despite everything, I didn't want to lose the family I had left. But sometimes, Letting go was the hardest thing to do. I had to choose my peace, my integrity, and my future over the people who had never understood me. I had to let go of the idea that family meant blindly accepting everything, even when it wasn't right. I stood up slowly, my heart heavy, but steady. "We're done here," I said, looking at Andrew and Gabriella. "You've had your say, now it's my turn." My voice was calm, but there was a finality to it, a sense that I wasn't turning back. I could feel the weight lifting from my chest as I spoke. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I wasn't doing this out of anger or resentment. I was doing it because I had to. Mom tried to speak, but I held up my hand. "I don't want to hear any more excuses. This is about doing what's right, not just for me, but for all of us. This family is broken, but I won't let you destroy what's left." The room was silent for a long moment. The shock in their eyes was enough to tell me that they hadn't expected me to fight back, to stand my ground. It was then that I realized my father had been right. Sometimes love means standing firm. It wasn't always about being the person everyone wanted you to be. It wasn't about making everyone happy. It was about knowing where to draw the line, even if it meant facing the hardest truths. As I walked out of that room, leaving behind the chaos I couldn't control, I felt lighter than I had in days. The anger had faded, replaced by something stronger, clarity. I wasn't just fighting for money or power. I was fighting for what I believed in. I was fighting for the man I had become, and for the values that had been instilled in me, even when my family couldn't see them. Christian followed me outside, his small hand tugging at my sleeve. "Uncle Dom," he said, looking up at me with a smile that seemed to light up the world. "You did the right thing." In that moment, I knew he understood, and that in itself was enough to remind me why family meant so much to me. Not because of what we shared, but because of the trust and love we were supposed to give each other. Christian was the future. He was everything I had fought for, and everything my father had wanted me to protect. It's been 2 weeks since that confrontation, and every day since then has felt like a slow unraveling of the life I once knew. Things have settled for now, but I can't shake the feeling that the lessons I learned in those moments are far from over. The truth always has a way of coming to light, and sometimes standing up for what's right means facing the hardest choices, the hardest truths. The repayment plan has been set in motion. Andrew and Gabriella are going through the financial counseling Dad had intended, and the house is now being managed with the care it deserves. The Mountain View property has been saved, and Christian's college fund is protected. Doubled, in fact, thanks to the investments Dad made quietly, without anyone knowing. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about saving what mattered: family, integrity, and a sense of purpose. But there's one thing that sticks with me the most: the words Dad left behind. Sometimes love means standing firm. I've thought about that line every day since he passed, and I now realize just how true it is. Sometimes standing firm means saying no to the people you love, even when it feels like the hardest thing to do. It means knowing that love isn't always about giving in or keeping the peace. Sometimes love is about protecting what's right, even if it means facing the fallout. Christian is thriving now, his grades improving, and he's made new friends who see him for who he truly is, not the product of his parents' mistakes. The transformation in him has been nothing short of remarkable. Watching him grow, knowing that I had a hand in ensuring his future is secure, fills me with a sense of pride I can't put into words. He's the legacy, the hope, the change that I wanted to see in this family. And in the end, maybe that's all that matters. As I sit here thinking about everything that's happened, I realize that we often find ourselves in situations where we have to choose between what's easy and what's right. It's never clear at first. But sometimes, when everything seems to be falling apart, it's the moments we stand firm that build the foundation for something better. I look at my phone, but a message from Christian flashes on the screen. Uncle Dom, can we frame Dad's letter? I want to remember how important it is to always do the right thing, even when it's hard. And that's when I realized he understood. And in a way, maybe that was the most important lesson of all. Final question. What would you do if the people you trusted the most betrayed you? Would you stand up for what's right, or would you let it slide?